Alright, in the previous episode of Top 10 Things That Went Wrong While Trying to Make This Game, I accidentally created a bug while trying to fix a different bug where voiding out, or falling out of the world while in a room, would teleport you back to the overworld. Now, in case you don't remember why that's a problem, allow me to demonstrate. If I enter a room and then fall out of it, somehow, I'll be teleported back to the overworld. But the problem with being in the overworld is that the game doesn't expect us to be here, so there's some things that go wrong. I mean, the first and foremost is that the house is completely intangible. And the reason the house is intangible is so that during the cutscene when you're entering the house, you're able to appear as if you're entering the doorframe, which would normally be impossible since the house is a solid hitbox. Now, another weird thing that I found during testing was that if you void out of a room and you teleport to the overworld, you can no longer void out, ever again. Check this out. If I fall out of the world now, the cutscene never plays. It never detects me as being out of bounds. And in case you're curious why that's happening, the conditions for me voiding out is that in one frame, I have to be in the hitbox of a room, and in the next frame, I have to be out of the hitbox of the room. But since I'm outside of the hitbox of the room the entire time when I'm in the overworld, there's never a transition between being in bounds and out of bounds that happens ever again. So I can never void out. Now, the obvious fix to this is when you void out in a room, don't place the player back in the overworld, place them back in the room that they were in. And the location I chose for that is the place you end up after the cutscene where you enter the room, because that seems like a pretty good position to me. So how do we accomplish that? First, we need to make a special case in the void out routine for if it occurs while we're in a room. Now, we choose the location to teleport the player to right here. So we'll need to be able to get a reference to the room that a character movement controller is inside of. So I'll go ahead and make a function for that real quick. That should do the trick. Now we need to call that function to get that reference in the void out routine. If that reference is unassigned, we can simply run the code that we were running before. Otherwise, we want to do something different. Luckily, I have this really convenient function on the room object called getEnterTarget. And if I recall correctly, that is the location that the player is supposed to end up during that entering the room cutscene. Now let's try it out. I'll do the same thing I did with the position calculated in the overworld, adding a slight offset above that point just in case it puts us slightly in the ground. So let's try it out. Let's enter the room. Now that we're in here, let's purposefully void out. That is not correct. It did not put us in the room, so let's see why that happened. A typo. I forgot to put an exclamation point in front of room to invert the condition. Let's void out. Here we are. And we're back in the room. We're safe. I believe we can still void out, and we should teleport back to where we're supposed to be. That is the case. I also noticed that the camera still teleports to be above us whenever we get returned. But, like I said in the previous episode, I don't much care to figure out why at the moment, because it's not that big of an issue. Alright, with that fixed, what do I do now? Alright, so I took a little bit of a break. I was actually working on a different project that I had an idea for, and I got a little bit of the way through that, and realized it was way harder than I thought. So while I was still trying to figure out what to do next in Adventure World, I was messing around with it, specifically with the void out mechanic, and I made some changes to it that I want to show you. So I'm gonna go void out somewhere. I guess in a room would be closer. So if I void out, I noticed a script is missing on a camera somewhere. That is interesting. I'll have to look into that. If I void out, I don't know if you could tell, but I think the process of voiding out is a little bit faster. You don't have to wait nearly as long. And also, you may have noticed that I fixed the camera issue. It doesn't teleport above you anymore. And while doing that, I also made it to where if you void out and it cannot figure out what to do with you, it cannot figure out how to put you back in a safe place, you're supposed to game over. But of course, there is no game over because there's no health. And so I realized that's what I want to work on next. I want to work on the health system and also maybe show you guys what animating looks like, at least for me. But I also kind of want to know what this missing script is. It's on the camera. What are we missing? Okay, I'm guessing that was a screen corruption script that I wrote. What about this one? Okay, that's the same thing. Alright. You may have also noticed that the hearts are slightly smaller. I decided that they looked better that way. So I just finished making this hearts tester script, which should allow me to test the visuals of the hearts. I'm thinking of doing it kind of like how it is in Zelda, where there's 4 segments for each heart. And I want to make it to where if you lose health, it'll show the health that you are going down to, but also will fill in the amount of health you've lost in white. So maybe I could show you that real quick. Alright, looks good. I don't actually want to maximize it at the moment. Last HP is the HP that we had before the animation, and next HP is the amount of HP we're supposed to have at the end of the animation. So let's reduce it by half. Okay, that looks pretty good. So say we lost all of our health. Yep, that looks pretty good. So let's say we only had 6. Alright, 7. That's not quite right. It's not showing increments right now. Let me see what's going on there. Apparently, I was only setting the fill amount partially. It looked like I made a mistake while copying and pasting. That happens a lot. Let's try it one more time and see if it works now. Alright, let's try drawing 11 HP. Okay, that looks good. 10. And this is an integer, so I should just be able to... Yeah, oh, that's too fast. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1... 0, and if it goes negative, it still works if it goes negative, and if it's more than 12, it still works as well. So let's just do some random numbers like 7 and 3. Okay. 6, 7, 8. We're still having the same problem as last time, which was that the white hearts fill amounts are not correct. So let me see what's going wrong now. Oh, okay, it's the exact same copy and paste problem that happened twice. That's wonderful. Alright, let's test it again. Let's do 7 and 3. That looks pretty good. 7 and 5. 7 and 6. 8 and 6. Yeah, this all looks like it's working pretty well, actually. Nice. Now I need a system to keep track of a character's health. I'll just call it character health, I guess. That makes sense to me. So at the moment, I only think I need one method on it right now, which is deal damage. This method is incredibly simple. Just reduce the HP by whatever amount is specified in the function. And just in case the HP falls below 0, we'll clamp it to an appropriate range. We'll clamp it between 0 and, I guess, integer max value. That should do the trick. Okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of refactoring. That looks much better. But also, since we need to call a function when the character dies, I think it would make a lot more sense to check if the HP is less than or equal to 0, calling that function if that's the case, but perhaps just before that, setting HP to 0. And with that done, I'll add a reference to the character health script on the player movement controller, and whenever you void out and are supposed to die, I can deal damage. It looks like I ended up calling that player health in the comments, so I'll rename it there. Now what I need to do is make it to where this function will get called when the player dies. That should do the trick. So to make sure it's working, I'm going to do a debug log that simply says, you died, and let's see if it's working. Alright, let's void out to see if it works. Aha, there we go. You died. I also noticed that the hearts aren't even visible when the letterboxing is active, so that's kind of a shame. I also realized, however, that we probably want a callback for when the character gets damaged, and that one's going to be a little bit different. We want to know how much HP the character had before they were damaged, and how much they will have after they're damaged. Alright, that makes a lot more sense. When we want to calculate what our HP should be after we get damaged, if we just subtract the damage from our HP and clamp it between 0 and whatever our HP was before, then we can ensure we get a logical value, because the highest it could possibly be would be HP, because it would not make sense for dealing damage to give us more health, and it also couldn't go any lower than 0, which it doesn't need to. With that done, I'm going to make a script that handles changes to the player's health, and the effects that those should have in the game. I'm going to make another change. Instead of the movement controller directly interacting with the character health, I'll make it interact with the player health, which is kind of a wrapper of the character health. And of course, now the name makes a lot more sense. And so we could probably change this to be a special function that is made specially for killing the player instantly. Probably something like instant kill. Let's copy that over here. We're probably also going to need a copy of the on-death function on the player health. That should do the trick. Let's go ahead and implement that instant kill function real quick. So basically we've just moved the code that we originally had in the player movement controller to player health. It does the same thing. Now we also want the player health script to actually animate the hearts when we take damage. Let's go ahead and connect that function. That should do the trick. So I'm going to keep this really simple. We're just going to call the draw fill function on the hearts meter and pass it the last HP and the next HP. So it'll stay in that animation forever, but it should be good for testing at the moment. So I'm going to do something really simple for testing. I've just added the player health to the global script. So now what I can do is I can just deal damage to the player when they pick up the item. I'll do 1 heart of damage, but this also means that I need to add a deal damage function to the player health. And that should just be as simple as wrapping the function on the character health script. Makes sense to me. Alright, it's time to test. I must admit, I do not have a good feeling about this. And rightfully so. We have a null reference exception. It appears we are missing a reference, obviously. What are we missing? Ah, that's right, I changed the type of that. That should do the trick. So let's see what happens when we try to pick up this item. That was weird. It looked like it flashed for a moment. Let's try and pick it up again. Yeah, it flashed, but then it went right back to having full health. I don't know what that's about. Could it be that perhaps our hearts tester is still on and constantly resetting the health every frame? Possibly. Alright, let's try it. There we go. We took some damage. We should be able to take some more. We did! And it's actually got the correct updated value for our health. Let's do it one more time. Uh-oh, null reference exception. That's not good. We did technically just die, so it probably has something to do with that. That's weird. It's trying to invoke it, but I'm guessing it must be null, which is weird. See, that right there, we're assigning it right there. Actually, I realized what's going on. So this is kind of like subscribing to the event on the player health script. But it's probably happening before this is happening. So before our on death is copied from health's on death. Which I know that sounds kind of weird, but I think that might be what's happening. So here is my solution. I am just going to make a function that explicitly makes us subscribe to that little event. So there we go. That should do it. Alright, I see a debug log that says it ran. That's a good sign. So let's go over and touch this really dangerous item. You died. There we go. But of course I can still move around. That's because the only thing that our function that watches the player's death does is debug log. Before I move on to game over, I want to add one last thing to the health system, and that's invincibility frames. So I'll make it to where you can set the amount of invincibility time on a character health script, and I'll have a timer that will count down. It'll be set to the time that damage was dealt when the function is called, but before that, it will check to see how much time has passed since the last time damage was dealt. And if that time is less than the amount of invincibility time, it will return from the function immediately and not deal any damage. I might also want to create a function that returns true if we're in the middle of that invincibility period. So I realize with this setup, the player will actually be invincible for the first invincibility time seconds that the game is running. So I'm going to initialize the timer to -infinity to make sure that that doesn't happen. I also want to modify the shader for the characters to be able to show the characters in invincibility frames, probably by flashing red or something like that. This should be pretty simple. I'll just create a tint variable that goes from 0 to 1. It should be as simple as interpolating between the desired color and red by that tint value. I think that should do the trick. Let's test it. So I should be able to turn tint up, and sure enough, it gets redder the higher the tint is. Perfect. This means player health will need a reference to the player's material. We'll also need to decide how much tint the player should have during invincibility frames. In the update function, we can just set the tint on the shader to either be 0 if we're not invincible, or the invincibility tint if we are invincible. Alright, let's try it. Walk up to the item, press B, and it looks like we take damage, and we have the flashing red. So to make sure those invincibility frames are actually preventing us from taking damage, I'm going to make the period a lot longer. Alright, I've set the period to 5 seconds, so let's try it. Take damage, walk away, walk back, try to take damage, it doesn't work, walk away, walk back, now that the invincibility frames are done, take damage, it does work, walk away, walk back, can't take damage, can take damage, alright. So it looks like these invincibility frames are working. So I was hoping to end off this episode by making the game over sequence and the game over animation, but this episode's already pretty long, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far, and stay tuned for the next episode. I'm pretty sure I'm going to make a third episode, since I really want to show you guys the process of making the animation. Bye!